Welcome to the Eudaemon, or as my friends call it, Eudaeman. Commentary on the Daily Eudaemon, one of the internet's longest continuously running blogs. Philosophy, religion, current events, even some politics. All from a Catholic perspective.
I'm his daughter Meg. I'm his daughter Tess. We listen to every episode 5 times.
Welcome to October. Yeah, I forgot to mention last week that new music is by Scott Holmes. His song Heavy Rock. I really like it a lot. Have a good show this week lined up. I'm going to be talking about a thing I call primary obligations. This is a concept I came up with to answer the everyone has 24 hours in the day fallacy. I'm going to address that quote-unquote oxymoron of Catholic Libertarianism. I don't think it is an oxymoron, but I'll explain a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about the early rise of the nation state, or the centralized state. I'm going to criticize libertarianism a little bit, using a passage from Thomas Aquinas I ran across as a launching point. And we're going to do a little bit of saint talk and hope to talk a little bit about inebriation on the silver screen. Hope you enjoy the show. Yeah, that's a band called Eddie, All the Way Up. You'll probably be hearing a lot of that as the podcast goes forward. I want to talk a little bit about primary obligations. If you read the Daily Eudaemon, you'll see probably a too often recurring theme, which is how freaking busy I am. You know, having 7 children, it's not easy. It's a financial burden. It's one I don't love the financial burden, but I love having the 7 kids. It's a huge time commitment. And one thing that's always stuck in my craw, which is people saying, well, we all have 24 hours a day and 7 days in a week, and so don't tell me you don't have time. You know, one time, I heard secondhand, no one said it to my face, but yeah, I wasn't volunteering in a certain club enough, and someone said, well, you know, he has 7 kids, and they said, well, that's bullshit. We all have 24 hours in a day. Yeah, my response is, well, it might be bullshit, but it's real bullshit. Okay? I mean, I do have 7 kids. I am the sole provider. I have a job that I can work more hours or earn more money for them to put them through college, do whatever. But that got me thinking, I mean, it is true. We all had the same amount of time on this earth. And I came up with the concept a while back of primary obligations. And I'll just define it for you. Basically, primary obligations are things that no son, parent, spouse, employee, or business owner feels right about neglecting or blowing off. If there are things you have to do in that product set, it's a primary obligation. And yes, you could throw in like duties to God, like prayer. And as a Catholic, I think that is a primary obligation. Don't get me wrong. But I do ascribe to that old Buddhist saying where an apprentice is told by his master to pray half an hour a day, and the apprentice says, I'm too busy. And the master said, okay, make it an hour. I do think there's a lot to be said for that, that truth. But that definition of primary obligations, things you can't blow off when you're in that role as a parent or a son or daughter or whatever, I think that helps you a lot to try to get, prioritize, yes, but these are things that you simply cannot neglect, and any decent person is going to agree with you. So there are a lot of decent people who are not Christians, and they may not agree that prayer is a primary obligation, so I don't, necessarily include that here. But everyone agrees, hey, if you got a son or daughter, you need to go to the sporting events, okay? You got parents still on this earth. If you're blessed to have your parents around, well, you need to spend some time with them. You need to spend some time with your spouse. You just can't neglect her. If you work for someone, you need to put in an honest day's work. And that's all there's to it. And bottom line is, if you have 4 kids, you have less time after you satisfy your primary obligations than the dude with no kids. Okay? And it's that simple. And so the 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, that's the real BS. Okay? It doesn't answer it begs the question, I guess is the way you'd put it. It's like, you're not telling me anything. Okay? Now, just because you have, say, like in my case, 7 kids, the analysis doesn't stop there. Because you have to be honest with yourself as to what does a parent or son or spouse have to do as part of a primary obligation. And that's not always so clear. So do I need to work 60 hours a week like I often have? That's questionable. Okay. Do I need to be in the garden as often as I do? As often as I am? Well, that's even more questionable. I started gardening in 2008 with the meltdown. Lost a lot of money in the market. Wondered how I was going to feed the kids, so I started gardening. So growing food for my family would clearly be a primary obligation. To take it to the extent I have, if you read the Daily Demon, you'll see I talk a lot about gardening. Well, that's highly, highly questionable. Going out and playing a ton of golf, if you're doing it to develop clients for your business, maybe that's a primary obligation. So it's not always easy to know what a primary obligation is and what it isn't. And that's where, prayer and reflection comes in. You got to sit down and think about these things yourself. What I often do on the Daily Demon or on this podcast or talking to my kids or talking in Theology on Tap, I'm just trying to give people the proper framework to analyze these issues. And when it comes to analyzing how to spend your time on this earth, which is the most crucial question of all, don't be caught up in these cliches like the 24/7 idea. Just analyze it. Okay, I got these primary obligations. I have to do this. Try to be honest with yourself as to what is a primary obligation, and then set your priorities from that standpoint, from that point forward. All right, dig that music. It's Waylon Thornton. His song "Favorite Secrets," I believe, is the name. That's a great tune. I could listen to that all day long, or at least me and a case of beer could listen to that all day long. Got that at Free Music Archives. Great selection of stuff. Kind of unwieldy because there's so much there, but pretty much all the music you hear on this podcast comes from Free Music Archives. And also Free Sounds, something or other. Check it out. There's some pretty good stuff there. And it's all royalty free. Just have to provide attribution, which I do over the Daily Demon. I'm getting most of my feedback is coming from the libertarian stuff. I guess, I think there's a real hunger out there for it. And I have some ideas why. That's not the point of this segment. What I want to talk about here is, this is supposed to be mostly a Catholic podcast, and I know there are Catholics out there, good Catholics. Catholics are better at being Catholic than I am, who think libertarianism is a heresy of some sort. That's absurd. You don't have to be libertarian to be Catholic, and all Catholics don't have to be libertarian or liberal or conservative. Catholicism is binding on the conscience of a Catholic when it comes to dogmas pertaining to faith and morals, not when it comes to political systems, finances, science, things like that. But let's assume that it is a big issue. I was recently hearing from a Facebook post where a Catholic said a Catholic can't be a libertarian, and then he quoted the Catechism. I can't remember what he quoted, but I have no reason to think he was making it up. And what had some validity to it, but what you don't understand is a lot of Catholic political philosophy harkens back to the 13th century and Thomas Aquinas. What Thomas Aquinas lived in, the society he lived in, was so totally different than what we have today. The government structure, the reach and power of the state, you can't even get your mind around it. Many historians have pointed out that the Middle Ages really were pretty much the closest thing we've had to a libertarian age. So when you have political philosophy, principles deriving from St. Thomas Aquinas, and much of what he said still informs Catholic thought. He is the premier philosopher of the Catholic Church. When you have principles deriving from his milieu, they really don't make any sense. That's not to say that they're irrelevant. Thomas Aquinas' principles don't make sense in this political culture because the political culture is so out of whack. So again, it's not that they're irrelevant. That'd be like saying, in this day of gay marriage and threesomes and fornication and extramarital affairs, etc., 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 the Catholic Church is teaching on, married life, and the conjugal act are ridiculous. They're outdated. Well, they're not ridiculous. They are outdated, but that's not because the Catholic Church is out of whack. It's because the culture is so far out of whack. And that's how I view any statements on Catholic political philosophy that have kind of derived from the Middle Ages and St. Thomas Aquinas' thought. They don't even apply to this political milieu. While listening to that last segment, I realized I should probably give you a concrete example of what I'm talking about. In particular, here's a passage from the Catechism quoted to me as proof that libertarianism is bogus for a Catholic. Quote, political authority has the right and duty to regulate the legitimate exercise of the right to ownership for the sake of the common good, unquote. Oh, all right. I don't necessarily dispute that whatsoever. How does that speak to today's situation with 1 billion words in the Code of Federal Regulations, a set of statutes from the federal government alone that take up, I can't try to think back to my law library, but it's a huge part of my library, just the statutes alone, not to mention the case law and interpretive decisions. Furthermore, it has to be for the common good. As I've said on this podcast, my biggest reason I'm a Catholic libertarian is because of the G.K. Chesterton problem of Hudge and Gudge, big business, big government, and bed with each other. How does it promote the common good to take from the poor to give to the rich? Or what really happens in this culture, use the poor to take from the middle class to give to the rich. And that is an unjust law, as the Catholic Church would point out, when you're taking from someone less well-off to give to someone more well-off. That's the problem of Hudge and Gudge. And again, one of the biggest reasons I am a libertarian. So that statement from the Catechism, it's true enough. And it'd be easier to apply that principle back at the time of St. Thomas Aquinas. And you'd like to apply that principle now, but in this political milieu, it's completely out of whack. It's just, it doesn't hardly get you anywhere to analyze this quandary we're in right now with the very powerful central states of the Western world. While we're at it, let's talk a little bit why the state grew so radically big after the Middle Ages. Again, I'm sure there's lots of reasons. I'll distill them down to two. The state had been growing increasingly centralized as warfare improved. The more technologically advanced the weapons of war became, the more money you needed to put an army in the field. The more money you needed, the more centralized power you needed to get that much money. Traditionally, warfare had been pretty much just squabbles between kings. In the old days, you couldn't even imagine warfare on the scale that our smallest wars are today. They didn't involve the common man. I mean, the peasant would have been basically like, oh, those are the kings and the knights out playing games. They're out fighting each other, trying to get more territory. I just want to grow my turnips here. So war never touched the common man, except of course if his fields got taken over and his daughter's raped by marauding troops or something. Of course, yeah, that's a little bit different story. But typically it was just an affair of kings. Well, with the rise of the nation states after Westphalia and the need to put more and more weapons and armies in the field, the state itself grew. This exploded after the French Revolution. See, the French Revolution, one of the most problematical things about it, in my opinion, is it basically turned the whole state, the entire nation of France, into the state. They had this idea that, well, we're a democracy, and therefore everyone has to participate in this war that we're launching, that they've been fighting since the very beginning of the revolution. So now the farmer, the peasant growing his turnips, he is expected to get out there and fight or send his sons to fight because this is for everyone. And so the French were able to mobilize just massive armies. That then forced everyone else to mobilize those massive armies as well. So just a quick history lesson for you. Hey, by the way, that last piece you heard was Mickey Mouse, like M-A-O-S, by Halloween. Nice little song there. It's called Not Drunk by the Joy Drops. I'm going to start this segment with a quote. Why do you look for rest when you were born to work? I ran across that last week in Thomas Aquinas' The Imitation of Christ. It's a great little quote, and I'm actually going to use that as a springboard to kind of criticize or discuss a little bit of libertarianism. This might be a little discursive as I try to flush through this. One of the libertarian strain of thought that I adhere to, for the most part, it teaches that, they have various premises, and one of which is man wants to have as much as you can with as little work as possible. And I think that's true as far as it goes. There's a reason the lottery is so fantastically successful, for government. In fact, I play it once in a while just for kicks. But is that enough though? I mean, is that all there is to it? Because as Aquinas says, basically we are meant to work. As through original sin, we know that that's just our lot in life. And the people who don't work, quite frankly, tend to become wastrels. Even the wealthy. I can recount stories of rich people I know who just go right down the toilet with partying and drinking and just dissipation in general. I think even rich people are beginning to understand that even though you're rich, you still want to keep working, even if it's not necessarily for an hourly wage. Maybe it's for charity or some sort of writing a book or something to keep yourself occupied. It's just our lot because of original sin. Work is natural to us. And I think this kind of points up something that Russell Kirk said. It's interesting. He went through 7 editions of the Conservative Mind. And by the way, I don't want to go into too many detours here in this segment because it could have a ton of detours. But Russell Kirk, he wrote a book in the 1950s called The Conservative Mind. It became a bestseller, fantastically successful, made him a household name pretty much in the 50s. And Bradley Berzer points out in an article he wrote for the American Conservative that the American Conservative went through 7 editions, but they're all a little bit different. And one thing that was quite notable is the first edition had quite a bit of libertarian thought in it. And as time went on, the Conservative Mind had less and less, or fewer and fewer libertarian thinkers. And it's interesting. I also read a quote by Kirk one time where he went through and said, I forget what it was, but he juxtaposed libertarian versus conservative thinkers. And he said something like, I prefer the intricate details, or intricate thought of Edmund Burke over the brazenness of Herbert Spencer, something like that. But he went through and it listed 10 different thinkers and juxtaposing them. And his whole point seemed to be that libertarians are kind of too simplistic, not enough nuance to their thought. And this Aquinas quote kind of points it out to me. It's like, okay, I know Frank Chodorov and others who I really like say things like, every man wants as much as he can get with as little effort as possible. I get that. I appreciate that. There's truth to that. But that's not the whole story. You also got to then look at what Aquinas said. man is born to work. And then how do you kind of square those two? And again, I'm not going to try to square it here. It's just when it comes to libertarianism, there is something, even the, I think the more nuanced, what I call natural law libertarianism of von Mises, and that you'll find at the Lew Rockwell Institute these days. Even the more nuanced versions of libertarianism, I sometimes think, miss some things when it comes to appreciating some of the intricacies of human existence. All right, welcome to second week of Saint Month. Actually, the second week of October doesn't have that many great feast days. The Eastern Church has two, I guess, of note, or that I would note. You got St. James the Apostle, but they also, more interestingly, have Simeon the New Theologian. This guy is great. I went on a reading kick of St. Simeon the New Theologian back when I started reading a lot from the Philokalia, and we'll talk about the Philokalia at a later date. It's a phenomenal work. But St. Simeon the Theologian is one of the main authors featured in that compilation. I liked him so much I went out and bought the book of his work, and Paulus Press, I think, puts out the Tradition of Western Spirituality or something like that. I found it interesting. I read that he later on informed a lot of John Wesley and the Methodists. So you might look at St. Simeon as a good bridge. It's an Eastern Orthodox work. The Roman Catholic Church, to my knowledge, does not recognize him as a saint, but the Eastern Orthodox Church does. And then a strand of Protestantism really appreciates his work. So he could be one of those authors that kind of cuts across all lines. And one reason I raise him, besides the fact it's his feast day is this week in the Eastern Church, another writer who kind of bridges the gap between the different traditions is Thomas Aquinas, who I read from in the last segment. Aquinas wrote, he was born in 1380, and he basically wrote in the 15th century when nominalism had kind of pushed to the front simple faith, trying to push philosophy, especially scholastic philosophy of Thomas Aquinas, to the background. And so Thomas Aquinas is a great little bridge between the Roman Catholic Church and our Protestant brethren. Week on a lighter note. That song was the Crevulators, You'd Come Back to Me, a great neo rockabilly group. I'd encourage you to check them out. And this week on a post from Friday's Daily Demon about lushes on the silver screen and in film. Basically just the article is Jack Norton, W.C. Fields, Otis from the Andy Griffith Show. And then a guy I'd never heard of, a guy named Foster Brooks, they called him the lovable lush, who'd appear on Johnny Carson and Dean Martin's Celebrity Roasts. There had been a long tradition of basically being drunk on screen as a fun, lovable kind of guy. And that pretty much has been killed by the alcoholism as a disease movement. Which is kind of sad, is kind of the gist of the article, which I agree with. Although, quite frankly, by the time I started watching, the lovable lush was no longer seen. I grew up with drunks like John Belushi in Animal House, and then my favorite, which they make mention of, was Arthur, Dudley Moore and Arthur. That was one of my favorite drunks of all time. But the author points out, by that point, though, those were kind of unusual in the silver screen. The days of the lovable, fun drunk had pretty much been killed off. And if you want to see some, just a great body of work that kind of celebrates the excessiveness of the Mad Men era of the 1950s, go to Modern Drunkard magazine. Great little publication. The primary author and editor, Frank Rich, is just funny as heck. Strongly encourage you to check it out. right, that wraps up another week. Hey, do me a favor. Go to iTunes, leave a review, give it a rating, put it on Facebook, tweet it, do what you can, get the word out. Listenership is growing. I really, really appreciate the support. If you can now start telling your friends and family, maybe take this to the next level, so to speak. Have a good week, everyone.